Hi, good to see you again. Welcome to Block 4, Operations and Equations with Directed Number. Lesson 6. I'll share my screen. So, in your previous lesson, you learned how to subtract directed number. Directed numbers are also called positive and negative integers. In today's lesson, you're going to learn how to multiply directed numbers. So you will learn how to multiply positive and negative integers. Just a minute. Okay. But before we start, I would like you to um, like the videos, subscribe to the channel, and share the videos to those you think can benefit. Also, click on the notification bell so that when new videos are released, you will be notified. By doing so, you help us grow our mission to provide a platform where children who may not otherwise have the financial resources to afford high quality maths education can do so just by having internet access. Thank you for supporting our mission. I would like you to pause the video and answer the retrieval practice questions in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So here you were asked to perform the calculations. So by now, you should already know how to work with your signs. Okay, so I'll reveal the answers and then I'll tell you exactly what we've done. And what we are doing now in terms of combining the signs to have a single symbol or a single sign is what we're even going to be learning in this lesson. So in maths, I want you to know that when two things are next to each other, they are multiplying each other invisibly. So it's happening, but we just pretend it's not happening. So the positive and the negative are actually multiplying each other. That's why I told you in our previous lesson that the positive and the negative will become negative. So these two are negatives. So 7 minus 6 is 1. These two are negatives. These two, these two. So it is like saying negative 2 subtract 2, which is negative 4, subtract 2, which is negative 6, subtract another 2, which is negative 8. These two are positive. So negative next to negative, so they're invisibly multiplying each other, is positive. So that's 7 add 6, 13. These two are negatives. These two are positive. Okay, so this is like saying negative 3 subtract 4 is negative 7, add 5 is negative 2. Now, just as we are considering how signs multiply each other to give you a different sign, I want you to see what you notice here. So you may have noticed that this is the same thing as 2 by 5 add 2 by 6. Okay, so 2 rows by 5 columns multiply by 2 rows by 3 columns. You could also have seen it like this, but all the same, we'll get the same result. Altogether, they add up to be 16. Let's do some new learning for this lesson. If I ask you to multiply negative 3 by 4, how would you represent this as counters? Well, you would say that's easy. You just need 3 negative counters, and then you need 4 lots of them. That gives you your result of negative 12, because you can see that we have negative 12 counters. Negative 12 counters. But what about this one? You can see that it's represented in a different form. Remember, multiplication is commutative, all right? So not exactly commutative, but we can represent even negative 4 by 3 in a different way. So we could represent it like that as well. But what about this one? How would we represent this using counters? It may not be exactly obvious how to multiply with a positive number, but when we look at number patterns, we'll begin to see why our result is going to be negative 12. All right. Now watch this. If we say 4 times 2, you would say it's 8. Then 4 times 1, you would say it's 4. 4 times 0 is 0. What about 4 times negative 1? Let's imagine that you didn't know what the answer is. Let's look at the pattern. If you observe the pattern, you would see that the numbers are decreasing by 4. So that should tell us that 4 times negative 1 has to be negative 4. Now, if we carry on the pattern, we know that 4 times negative 2 will be negative 8. So 4 times negative 3 has to be negative 12. So we have used the pattern to prove the result, even though you already knew the result. So this helps you to really understand that and have confidence that what you know is actually true when you prove it otherwise using other methods in maths. All right. Now, let's look at a different problem. If we have apologies, apologies. If we have this calculation as it is here, we can see that that one is 18. Yeah. So really think about what's going on here. So the first one is 18. We have 6 lots, 3 lots of 6. But the other one is negative 18. Why? Because we have 3 lots of negative 6. And by now, we learned from the previous exercise that a negative number times a positive integer or a positive number will give us a negative answer. Okay, so that should be negative 18. All right, I would like you to pause the video and answer question 1 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 1, here are the answers. Okay, so mark your work and celebrate your success. So here you can see that Dexter and Whitney can have 4 cups. So they've been shown the cups. Each of Dexter's cup contain these counters. All right, if you've been told what counters they contain, what is the total value of Dexter's counters? All right, so each of Dexter's cups contains these counters. So each of Dexter's cups contains 5 counters. So we just do 5 times 4, which is 20. Next, you're asked to complete the calculation. You just write 5 there. Next, you ask each of Whitney's cups contain these counters. So again, is 4 times negative 5, which would be negative 20. All right. Now, what's the same, what's different? Dexter's counters are positive, Whitney's counters are negative. All right, pause the video and answer questions 2 and 3 in 3 minutes. All right, assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 2 and 3, here are the answers. So for question 2, Ron has 7 cups. Each cup contains these counters. You're being asked to complete the multiplication. Well, Ron has negative counters. And if he has 8 counters, 8 negative counters, if he has 7 cups, it's going to have to be 8 times negative 7. or 7 times negative, sorry, 7 times negative 8, because she has negative, Ron has 8 negative counters. So 7 times negative 8, which would be negative 56. Next, you're asked to use the bar model to help you fill in the missing numbers in the calculations. Using the bar model, you can see that we have negative 3 and we have 5 lots of negative 3. So that will be negative 3 times 5. We can also rewrite the calculation as 5 times negative 3. So remember, multiplication is commutative. So we can swap the numbers around and the calculation would still be right. And that's the same for B. What if we have to multiply two negatives? Can you really represent this as using counters? Well, we can. Let's see the pattern. The number pattern will help convince you that these two numbers will result in 12. So I'm giving you a clue as to what the answer already is, but let's prove it. So if we have negative 3 times 2, you would say, well, I already know how to multiply a negative number and a positive number. I know I'll have a negative number. Yeah, so we know it's negative 6. Times 1, negative 3 times 1 will be negative 3. And negative 3 times 0 will be 0. Now, what is the pattern? Have you noticed that it is increasing by 3 every time? Because from negative 6 to negative 3, we have to do 3 steps to the right. So if you imagine your number line, as you move to the right, your negatives become smaller in terms of the number next to the negative sign, and it means the number is greater. So we're increasing by 3 every time. Now, that means using the pattern, negative 3 times negative 1 has to be 3, because if we're following the pattern, adding 3 every time, that has to be 3. So negative 3 times negative 2 has to be plus 3, which is 6. And negative 3 times negative 3 has to be 9 plus 3. And negative 3 times negative 4 has to be positive 12, okay, which is 12, right? So we have proven that negative times a negative number will give us a positive number. But have you noticed any patterns? So looking at what we've learned so far, have you noticed any patterns? When we multiply two positives, what happens? We get positive. When we multiply a negative and a positive, we get negative. When we multiply two negatives, we get positive. And when we multiply positive and a negative, we get negative. So this is what I made reference to in our earlier lessons. So you were already making use of this without actually realizing that this is what you were making use of. It's a very important concept in maths. Okay, let's look at one more example. So here, Dexter thinks that the product of these numbers, so negative 3 times negative 5 times 4, will be negative because there are some positive and negative numbers in the calculation. Well, if we think about it, and if we use the power of association, so to associate numbers, let's say, for example, yeah, so negative 3 times negative 5, that will be 15. All right. Now, 15 times 4 is 60. Well, let's use a different association. Negative 5 times negative times 4. That would be negative 20. But we also have negative 3. So negative 3 times negative 20 will be 60. So Teddy is not right, or I called him Dexter. He is not right. Okay, so it is really important that you pay attention to this that we have just learned. Okay, it's really important. Positive will give us positive. Positive times positive will give us negative. Negative times negative will give us positive. And then positive times negative will give us negative. It's now time for you to pause the video and answer the rest of the questions. Pause the video and answer questions 4 and 5 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 4 and 5, here are the answers. So for question 4, you were simply asked to complete the sequence of multiplications. By now, you should know and you should master your multiplication when it involves different signs. Whether it's positive or negative, you should know the relationship between them. Here are the answers for question 5. You were simply asked to complete the multiplication grid. So by doing this, you get a really good understanding of multiplying positive and negative integers. Pause the video and answer questions 6 and 7 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 6 and 7, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So here, 5 times 6 is 30. Negative 5 times 6 will be negative 30. And you can see how this relationship is produced in all these multiplications. So do not forget, this is what we've learned so far. That's positive. That's negative. That's negative. That's positive. And this is what we were using when we had things like this. For example, you saw when we did a calculation like this, 5 subtract negative 2. Remember what I said? When two signs are next to each other, they are invisibly multiplying each other. And that's what we were using. Okay, so this is the same thing as 5 add 2, which is 7. And we used it in different scenarios. Well, I don't want the video to be too long, but you can go and review what we've learned, that we were already using this without even knowing that these were the relationships we were using. And that is what is expressed here. So this one, negative 3 times 5 will be negative 15. Negative 15 times 2 will be negative 30. All right? And you can see that's what has happened here. Let's look at this one. Negative 5 times negative 2 is positive 10. Positive 10 times 3 is 30. Here, negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Positive 6 times negative 5 will be negative 30. This one, 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times negative 5 will be negative 30. All right. Okay, pause the video and answer questions 8, 9, and 10 in 4 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 8, 9, and 10, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So for question 8, you were simply asked to find what's missing to give you negative 36. Now we know that if we multiply a positive number with a negative number, that has to be negative. So we have a negative number, so that has to be a positive number. Now, the inverse operation will be to do negative 36 divided by negative 9. Now, you may notice already, although we haven't learned this, but we'll learn it in our next lesson. Are you telling me that division does the same thing like multiplication? Of course, yes. Because if I do the inverse operation to find what that number is, you can see that negative 36 divided by negative 9 gives me 4. And that is what we have done here. So here, 36, to do the inverse operation to find that number, 36 divided by negative 12 is negative 3. Are you telling me that division does the same thing as multiplication when we're working with the signs? Of course, yes. This one, look, if we do the inverse operation, 36 for this one divided by negative 6 will give me negative 6. All right? And you can see it there. So multiplication does the same thing as division. Division obeys the same rule. So if we do the inverse operation, 36 divided by 9 will give me 4. Negative 36 divided by 18 will give me negative 2, right? 36 divided by negative 36 will give me negative 1. Now, here you're asked to tick the correct calculations. It's by checking to make sure the calculations match. But I want to comment on this one. Negative 5 squared, this means negative 5, when you're squaring, it means you need to multiply that number by itself that number of times. This means negative 5 times negative 5, which is the same thing as positive 25. And it's the same thing as 5 squared, which is 5 times 5, which is same thing, 25. And it's the same thing here. But here, the calculations are not the same. Because negative 5 squared is not the same thing as, this is not in bracket. So it's not the same as this one. Here you're asked the product of the three numbers, number cards is 48. So multiplying them gives us 48. So how many of, all of the cards are integers and at least one of the cards is negative. So you can choose any combination of numbers to make your answer up. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. So what we have learned so far, we have learned how to multiply directed numbers or how to multiply positive and negative integers. Take note of the 4 things we have learned. Number 1, when you multiply a positive and a positive, you will get a positive number. If you multiply a negative and a negative, you will get a positive number. If you multiply a negative and a positive, you'll get a negative number. And if you multiply a negative and a positive, you'll get a negative number. Well done for sticking around to master directed numbers, which is a key foundation in your understanding of mathematical concepts. Well done for sticking around and for learning. Until next time, take really good care of yourself. Bye-bye.